Hey everyone, I hope you're doing amazing today. If you've been around my channel for a while, you'll know that about a year ago, I upgraded my DeWalt 735 planer with a helical head from Craftex. Craftex also sells a line of helical heads for 6-inch joiners. So that's what I'm going to work on today. This is a great way with these kind of upgrades just to bring new life to tools that maybe are a little bit tired. And I'll talk more about that as we do the upgrade to my joiner.
Now my first step, of course, was to remove the existing head, which conveniently had the blades out of it at this time. If that's not the case with your planer head, I would actually suggest doing that as one of your first steps. With that out of the way, I moved around to the back side of the planer and removed the fence assembly. I loosened the Allen bolts that were holding the keyway inside the top pulley. Then I moved on to removing the belt cover, which was just taken out by 4 Phillips screw heads. And finally, the bolts on the back side, just holding the cover in place. Now with the cover out of the way, this allows you to gently pull the belt towards yourself and at the same time turn the pulley, which will rotate the belt off of that top pulley. On my particular joiner, I have the ability to raise and lower the infeed and outfeed table. So I pulled both of them to the lowest settings just to give myself enough room for clearance. And then I was able to loosen the bolts on either side of the cutter head of the jointer. Now keep in mind that your joiner might be slightly different, so take your time with this, and I would definitely suggest checking out the written instructions that you can find on the BusyBee website. I'll make sure to link those below so you can check those out. Now from the existing cutter head, I did have to remove the bearings and their bearing blocks, as well as the upper pulley. I did put a bit of WD-40 just on that top pulley because it seemed to be just a little bit seized. And you'll notice I'm turning this as I hit it with a rubber mallet just to make sure that I'm putting even pressure as I can so the pulley doesn't bind. Now the bearing blocks on my particular joiner are slightly different than the ones in the instructions that BusyBee offers on their website, which is exactly why I screwed up and for sure broke one of my bearing blocks. Now fortunately for me, I have a buddy who's a machinist, so in less than an hour he was able to manufacture me the exact bearing block that I needed. But I will suggest that if you attempt this and you do have a similar bearing block to me, get a bearing puller. This will save you so much headache and honestly, time. With everything removed from the stock cutter head, I was able to start working on the helical head. Now because of the cost of 2x4s right now, I wasn't able to use them in the way it was described in the instructions, so instead I opted for a couple scraps of walnut. This just helps disperse the load so you're not putting too much pressure on one particular part of the bearing block. We all know how that goes. And pro tip, before even attempting this, I let the bearings sit in the freezer for about 20 minutes. This will help the metal to contract ever so slightly, so it actually makes the seating of the bearings a heck of a lot easier. With my front bearing and bearing block seated, I drilled a hole in another scrap of walnut, just bigger than what the drive shaft was, and I was able to use that just to pound that rear bearing and bearing block in place. Bearings in place, I moved on to reinstalling the new cutter head onto the joiner. And then retightening the bolts on the front and back side of the joiner that hold the bearing blocks down to the table. Now when I was trying to reattach the upper pulley, I actually found that this time around the fence support was in the way, so I removed that, but this actually gives you a better angle of what I was talking about in regards to putting the belt on. Now make sure the belt is on the bottom pulley and just push it in away from yourself as you're turning the upper pulley, and that will help the belt seat perfectly. Now this is where you want to slow down and take your time. What I'm doing here is adjusting my outfeed table so my straight edge just touches the highest point in the rotation on the cutter head. Now you want to make sure you do this on the front side and the back side of your outfeed table. If yours is too far out, what you'll want to do is actually shim up your bearing blocks, and a piece of paper usually is enough to make that work. having your machine apart is also a good time to do a bit of maintenance. So I did add a decent amount of paste wax just on the undersides of the slides for the fence. After plugging the machine in, I was able to test it for the first time. And holy smokes, this made such a difference. Not only was the finish absolutely perfect coming off of the machine, but, well, you can see how square this is too.
Now this has made just an absolutely unreal difference to the way that I can use this joiner. It was so incredibly easy to do this upgrade, despite my mistakes. I think in total it should take actually less than an hour to do the upgrade. Another big perk to this is if I do nick one of the knives, all I have to do is rotate that, and I'm not gonna have to worry about changing out a full set of knives. So if you look at your cost over time, this is a way better value than consistently having to buy or sharpen new knives. Busy Bee has a very extensive list on their website of the joiners that this helical head is designed to work with. My particular joiner was not on that list. However, I did my research. I went through the manuals for the ones that were recommended, as well as the manuals for this particular general joiner, to make sure that the bearing sizes were right so the shaft on the particular helical head would work. And it did. It worked perfectly, despite obviously my mistakes, but this is definitely an upgrade that I would suggest. If you have more questions about the Craftex Helical Head from Busy Bee, for sure let me know in the comments. Huge shout out again to Busy Bee for supporting my channel and helping me out with upgrades like this in the shop. Take care.